Hello, how are you guys doing today? This is Brighton, and today's video is going over should teenagers start 5-alpha reductase inhibitors or hair loss treatments, and what is a good age to start when it comes to starting hair loss treatments, things like 5-alpha reductase inhibitors, and we'll go over some hair stimulants, hair growth stimulants as well, to see when is a good time to start and what can be the negative effects from starting hair loss treatment at an early age, and what is the best treatments to do if you are experiencing, aggressive androgenic alopecia. So today's video is just going over the importance of DHT or dihydrotestosterone during puberty and why you can have some negative consequences if you start 5-alpha reductase inhibitors during your early adolescence and even around 17, 16 as well, or like people who shouldn't be taking 5-alpha reductase inhibitors, who are maybe late bloomers, for example, and some other things that will play into like genotype as well, if your body has a lot of aromatase activity comparatively to other individuals who don't and would tolerate something like a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor just fine, actually. We'll kind of go over some of those things today and what are just kind of some negatives when it comes to starting 5-alpha reductase inhibitors or hair loss treatments way too early, and some treatments that would probably be better for those individuals. And at the end of the day, if you are experiencing signs of androgenic alopecia and you aren't diagnosed yet, you definitely should go see a doctor or dermatologist to see what's going on exactly with your hair loss. But today's video is just going over some of my research that I've looked into when it comes to hair loss. What are the negatives that can happen if you start 5-alpha reductase inhibitors way too early? So we'll hop right on it. So what is a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor? Well, we're going to start with testosterone and dihydrotestosterone. Dihydrotestosterone is the main hormone that causes androgenic alopecia for male and female pattern baldness. So that's like for the Norwood pattern here. I can show as well for male and female. So testosterone converts into dihydrotestosterone through the 5-alpha reductase enzyme. 5-alpha reductase inhibitors like finasteride or dutasteride pretty much inhibit that conversion. So now there is more testosterone and possibly more estrogen because it can be an increase of aromatization as well. That's where it falls into, side effects and then negative effects when it comes to puberty. That's how some negative things can occur. And while dihydrotestosterone does have some properties that it has during puberty, for example, I'll show a list of some things that it may increase its benefits when it comes to primary and secondary male characteristic development, for it's a very androgenic hormone. I believe it's around 10 times more androgenic than testosterone, but it's not anabolic, by the way, so it doesn't have any muscle building properties, but it does have very potency when it comes to penile growth, facial hair development, other male characteristics like secondary, but some primary as well. But testosterone just to seem during after puberty though, testosterone just seems to be more. Dihydrotestosterone really doesn't do much after puberty, for it just kind of like stays paracrine and only stays really in the hair follicle. It does stay in the facial hair, and then the prostate I feel like is the most common, or it really just doesn't do much after puberty. Now during puberty, it is important to maintain just androgenic activity. So keeping dihydrotestosterone is important for, primary and secondary male characteristics. If you have crushed, dihydrotestosterone, you have an increase of aromatization. Of course, it depends on your genome, how much aromatase activity you'll have, found out through, genetics, but it also found out through blood work as well. But that is it can be a very pricey and, complex thing to get into when it comes to testing for your aromatase activity during puberty, and typically you're not going to be worried about that. When you have a increased aromatization during puberty, you may be at risk for more side effects, as in like premature bone plate closure. So that's like you stop growing. Now, obviously, how true is that, or if you actually start like finasteride at like age 16, is it really gonna stop you growing? Probably not, but there's a higher risk, and I really wouldn't risk it, especially for example, if like someone who was like 13 took like 2.5 milligrams of dutasteride, there's probably a very high chance that like they were gonna have premature bone plate closure. I think epiphyseal bone plate closure just increases with the aromatase activity. That's why people stop growing, is because, due to aromatization of, testosterone to estrogen. Testosterone itself is very, good for the bones. It keeps the bone strong, but it's aromatization that causes bone plates to close quicker. Obviously, it's genetics at the end of the day. If you are, if your parents are shorter or your lineage is shorter, then you're probably going to be shorter. It's just genetics. But it can, most of the time when it comes to increased aromatase activity, there is a higher chance that you will stop growing earlier. So that's just kind of like also a side effect to look into as well. And it's just not something to, even though there's not the most like research on it, it's just like something you probably shouldn't risk in general, just, if you want to keep on growing taller. There's also like premature, or your penile tissue will stop growing, so that's like less growth down there. Most people are not going to want that to stop growing earlier on, so obviously you should wait to like 18 or 19 for most 5-alpha reductase inhibitors. I guess that's my thesis at the end of the day here. So around 18 or 19 is a decent age to start, 5-alpha reductase inhibitors, because you're usually done, growing when it comes to secondary male characteristics. It's really your decision at the end of the day to start your treatments at whatever age you want. For example, if you were like younger, 14, 15, and you are experiencing extremely bad hair loss, and you want to start a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor, that is up to you. It is up to your decision at the end of the day. Now to kind of get into treatments for hair loss or androgenic alopecia that are not going to affect you negatively during puberty or adolescence. Like, for example, if you are experiencing early signs of androgenic alopecia during, 14, 15, and you don't want to start a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor, or you don't want to risk, certain growth of just secondary male characteristics, then there are options as well. Things like, or that are topical, for example, that don't go systemic, or, non-hormonal treatments as well. Now, for example, I'd say the top ones are going to be like minoxidil. It is a non-hormonal, but it is a hair growth stimulant. The bad thing about it, though, it is like a lifelong treatment when it comes to topical minoxidil. Oral is a little different. It is non-hormonal even when it's oral. There could be increased side effects from it, and there could also be things like hypertrichosis, where it's all over the body hair growth. It depends at the end of the day. I'm not a fan of oral minoxidil. I have a video on it as well, why I think topical is better. But a topical minoxidil is usually what I recommend, or what I say for people to start if they're younger. But obviously, you have to stay on it for life, because once you apply those, apply topical minoxidil, those hairs that grow from it depend on it. So if you stop, you have telogen effluvium, and those hairs will fall out. Well, if they grow back, they're not going to be stronger or minoxidil reliant. So yes, minoxidil, yes, it works very well for growing hair and keeping hair thick, but it is something that you stay on for life. That's obviously the bad part about it, but in general, I think minoxidil is a great choice if you are experiencing early onset, androgenic alopecia. If you are experiencing early onset androgenic alopecia, you have to kind of start as much as possible, because that's a sign of you have the very aggressive case, and it's something that you definitely should start as soon as possible when it comes to hair loss treatments. And that's why some people may recommend even finasteride and dutasteride, in your early teens, because, you gotta stop, the hair loss in its tracks before it gets too late and you can't gain that ground back. Because a lot of people, once they get to like a Norwood 3 or Norwood 4 especially, it's gonna be almost impossible to get that hair back from hair loss treatments and hair growth stimulants without like a hair transplant, for example. That's, I'd say, the first recommendation, even pairing that with tretinoin to increase minoxidil sulfate activity, sulfosyltransferase enzyme, so that increases the minoxidil's effect. And then maybe something like microneedling as well for maybe increased absorption from the minoxidil. But if you are going to do microneedling, have a microneedling machine that's like just in and out, and something at a low, like 0.5 millimeters deep penetration, nothing high, because microneedling is a mixed bag for me. I think I definitely grew a lot of hair from microneedling minoxidil, but it can cause some damage down the line, and scar tissue buildup, and just some damage that could be permanent. So that's why I don't recommend like a 1.5 plus millimeter depth. I think something like 0.5 millimeter depth is the most effective, maybe possibly. Obviously, I'm not going to recommend it. I'm going to recommend tretinoin over microneedling, but some people may get some great results from microneedling and minoxidil, which I did personally, but I'm not going to put it on my top recommendation list when it comes to, growing some hair back. I typically would recommend something like tretinoin with minoxidil. You could also increase the dose of minoxidil topical, like 5% to up to 10 to 15% as well. I wouldn't use 2%, by the way. Not effective. Really comparatively at all to 5% or even increased percentage of topical minoxidil. Some other hair growth treatments for people who are, younger, or people who just don't want side effects. Maybe they don't tolerate 5-alpha reductase inhibitors well as an adult. I may recommend something like Floridel to look into, topalutamide, also known as. This is a anti-androgen, or works as binding to the androgen receptor as an androgen antagonist. So dihydrotestosterone can't bind to it. This also seems to be not very doesn't go very systemic. So Also, something that may work very well, but it can be kind of hard to get your hands on, especially in America, and be very pricey. So, look into it in your own time. I think that is something that could be promising for someone who is an early teenager, or, someone who doesn't tolerate 5-alpha reductase inhibitors well when it comes to a side effect profile. Because there are some individuals who don't, they may have an increase of aromatase activity when it comes to 5-alpha reductase inhibitors, but it just kind of depends. It's rare, but it can happen. Also, something too would be an alpha-estradiol. Also, it has a different mechanism of action. It is a synthetic estrogen, but also binds to the androgen receptor, making sure that dihydrotestosterone does not, bind to it, and inhibiting 17B dehydrogenase. That's the mechanism behind it. And then some other hair growth stimulants, something similar to minoxidil, a minoxidil, which is almost identical when it comes to molecular structure, which it is almost as old as minoxidil itself, but I think minoxidil is more effective to a minoxidil in general, but I guess it's something you could pair with minoxidil, possibly. Then there's stomoxidine, which is a different mechanism of action. For minoxidil is a potassium channel opener. Stomoxidine works more of a hypoxia-like mechanism for hair growth. So obviously, these are some treatments that may possibly be better for people who are younger and don't want the systemic side effects from 5-alpha reductase inhibitors. These things don't seem to go as systemic. Well, that comes to topilutamide and alpha-estradiol. Those are treatments that are going to be things that are going to be less systemic and causing systemic side effects, but they can be hard to get your hands on and more expensive. But at the end of the day here, I'm not going to recommend them usually because they're hard to get. They can be expensive. We don't have that much research on these things like topilutamide and alpha-estradiol and even the hair growth stimulants as well. I'm not a fan of that. I think it's more important to choose things that are easier to get, maybe more affordable, and that are going to have, more studies and literature to back them up in general. So that's just, your topical minoxidil, maybe at a higher percentage. Or something I recommend would be something like topical finasteride. And the reason why I choose topical finasteride over topical dutasteride is the Dalton rule. Now, some things, if they have too high of a molecular weight, the 500 Dalton rule is where if something's over 500 Daltons, it is not going to be able to penetrate and bind to the androgen receptor very well and actually express its effects. For example, topical dutasteride has a high molecular weight. It is not going to be able to be as effective as something like topical finasteride for its molecular weight is lower than 500 Daltons. So topical dutasteride, some people who, when it comes to mesotherapy or something like injection of topical dutasteride, or not topical dutasteride, just injecting dutasteride in the scalp, then that's going to be effective. But that's going to be pricey, and it's therapy. You have to do it monthly or every couple weeks for. Yes, dutasteride has a longer half-life than finasteride. I believe that topical finasteride is going to be easier to get your hands on, easier to apply, and yes, you do it daily, but it also doesn't go as systemic. It doesn't crush as much systemic THC nearly as much as oral finasteride, and since it has lower molecular weight, you can trust it and actually being more effective at binding to the actual androgen receptor itself and stopping miniaturization of the hair follicle from dihydrotestosterone. Yes, topical dutasteride seems more promising, but it really isn't, just because its molecular weight is too high. So I would recommend topical finasteride and just topical minoxidil, maybe even a higher percentage of topical minoxidil for these individuals who are experiencing early onset androgenic alopecia in their teenagehood, or even individuals who experience bad side effects from 5-alpha reductase inhibitors in general when it comes to oral consumption of finasteride to dutasteride. Now, if you have a very extreme androgenic alopecia, after puberty, then I would probably recommend taking a very strong oral 5-alpha reductase inhibitor, because the crushing of the scalp DHT from something like 2.5 milligrams of dutasteride daily is going to be just so effective, and it's going to be the strongest treatment pretty much. This is only during something like puberty, for example. I would recommend something just like a topical finasteride and topical minoxidil, maybe at a higher percentage, when it comes to a safest and just probably easiest obtainable just treatment in general. But obviously, you should talk to your doctor about this. This, it can be, a delicate subject for some individuals who don't want to stop their secondary male characteristic development and stuff like that. So at the end of the day, this is just my kind of input from the research I've done and my kind of anecdote. For before, I don't recommend things like ketoconazole as much, because how much is an anti-androgen that's going to stay on your scalp 10 minutes at the most a day really going to do for hair growth? Not much. It could be good for your hair quality in general. Yeah, it could be a great anti-dandruff shampoo, for example. But ketoconazole, something I don't push as much. You can use it if you want. Like, I'm not like against it. I used to use it. So I mean, like, I'm not against it. But how effective is it going to be? Probably not as much, unless you use a higher percentage, but that kind of stuff can really dry out your hair. So my opinion and my thing, obviously, you can disagree. I think topical finasteride and topical minoxidil, 5 to 15% is probably going to be your most effective when it comes to a hair loss treatments for people who are, teenagers or people who experience, side effects from 5-alpha reductase inhibitors, but that is quite rare. At the end of the day, if you're experiencing androgenic alopecia aggressively and you're an adult, you should probably take a strong 5-alpha reductase inhibitor orally. I think that's probably going to be your best bet, and then applying with topical minoxidil, and also even pairing with tretinoin or possibly microneedling as well, a microneedling machine. So yeah, I think though, at the end of the day, it's your choice. There are risks and rewards when it comes to hair loss treatments. It is your decision. So do that how you will. I think that's going to be the end of the video for today. Now, I may have missed out on some things, some treatments and some other things as well, some mechanisms. If I got anything wrong, or you think I got anything wrong, from just your anecdotes or what your beliefs are, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. All feedback is appreciated. And yeah, if you enjoyed today's video, leave a like, and it helps the algorithm, and a comment helps the algorithm. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed, and yeah, I'll see you guys later.